Hello and welcome to the Decision Intelligence Podcast, where we have real, candid conversations with thought leaders, practitioners, and tech experts about AI, decision intelligence, and the future of work. I'm your host, Fred Lalvio, co-founder and CEO of Era Technology. So today I'm joined by a good friend, a supply chain executive, Sasha Koff, who brings more than 2 decades of experience leading digital transformation at companies like Dell and Johnson and Johnson. Sasha is widely recognized as a leading voice in modern supply chain strategy. Sasha, welcome. Good to see you. How are you?
I'm great, Fred. Thanks for having me today. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, like always, we love to catch up together. Start with the first question. We're going to go right there. You've had an amazing career. You've led incredible supply chain digital transformation, as I mentioned, at Dell and at J&J. You've also had a chance to work together with Era, and we worked together at your time at Dell. So let's start with you sharing a little bit about your background and what drew you into this space, digital and supply chain.
I love it. I love it. Well, look, you already gave my resume, but I think what really has drawn me to this space and it keeps bringing me back is that this intersection of supply chain, data, and people, and the fact that there's this pattern that keeps showing up through this connection point, which is that the challenge is rarely the technology is not necessarily the hard part. It's about how are we actually thinking about the problem. And if I think about the two industries that you mentioned, right, Dell being a
Yeah.
high velocity tech company and J&J being a high, regulatory framework, the fundamental lesson that really actually ran through both of them was this constraint that, it was almost always human. It wasn't just technical, but it was how could technology actually help support humans in making better decisions, making better informed decisions, and then really using that asset more effectively. And I think the thing that always brings me back is this space is really about the point where um, it comes together and from the place of it being around an idea becoming reality, right?
Hmm.
You've got this planner that says, hey, you know what, I need this product and it needs to be XYZ in Y place and in so many days, and you pick your head up and there's a product that's sitting on the shelf at a hospital. There's a computer that's been delivered to an office space that's needed to really go after the next innovation. And so this opportunity to really bring kind of this idea of what great could look like with the reality of what actually happens in the physical world is just really exciting. It's very motivating.
But I talked about, J&J, Dell. I think people are curious, like how you became an expert in that topic. We'll talk about people. We'll talk about how did you get there? How did you build your knowledge, your experience? What's been the different what's been your trajectory? I think it's super interesting.
Yeah. So look, I think it's taken beyond a meandering path. And if you looked at my initial resume at J&J, you'd be probably going, what in the world was this person doing?
Exactly.
Right? My formal education was in engineering and I had a minor in accounting. I went off, I did strategic kind of consulting work for the US federal government. And then I went off to do business work, in terms of an MBA and started out thinking, okay, I will do acquisition and divestiture work. And what really I think ended up transpiring was this art of just curiosity in terms of how things worked, understanding deeply different processes, and just wanting to constantly learn something new. And having mentors and sponsors that were willing to take chances on me to really try in different spaces. So where most people would grow up in supply chain either through procurement or through planning or through manufacturing, I really had the luxury at the time of having a very senior person at J&J who fundamentally believed that the supply chain executive of the future was going to need to be able to understand fundamentally across these different domains and make
Yeah.
connection points that most folks, I think, would have said he was crazy. And he really encouraged me to kind of take a pathway through multiple divisions and be okay with what that trajectory would look like. And I think it actually served me really well because I was able to make these connections in terms of inflow and outflow of information and being able to pull that together, and then also being just constantly faced with different technologies over and over again. So I was never afraid of, okay, well, what is the different technology? How does it work? Where is it going? How does this connect to another system that might already be up and running in another place of the business? Are there overlaps? Are there gaps, right? And so I think this is really what kind of kept bringing me back to this connection point of process and technology, and always being at a place where I wanted to learn what was the next best thing that was coming to the forefront, and how could that be integrated in terms of the processes.
And then when you transitioned to Dell, you brought that experience together. Can you talk a little bit about how it served you, without going into any details, of course? But I think
Yeah,
people are curious, like, how do you become Sasha? What are the key inflection points? You mentioned the mentor, you mentioned curiosity, you mentioned your initial background. Now, next inflection point, how did that become a strength when you moved to Dell?
yeah. So I think, look, there was sort of this nagging question in the back of my head while I was at J&J. Is I had an incredible trajectory, right? In
Yeah,
multiple divisions, roles, you name it. And part of it was it dumb luck, or did I actually really know what the hell it is I was actually doing? And
love that.
I had a mentor who said to me, look, the only way you're ever going to really prove that to yourself is if you actually switch industries.
Mm,
You fundamentally know the nitty gritty of how things operate from a supply chain perspective, but go try a totally different industry. See what you learn, see what's different, see what's unique, see where you land. And right, having just the opportunity to join another incredibly marquee company like Dell, where it was a switch to the industry landscape, I think for me was being able to bring that strength of really solid fundamentals to a totally different mindset in terms of how the industry operated was an incredible asset in terms of people leadership, et cetera. And I know we'll talk about that further.
yeah.
But really, I ground the success I had at Dell in terms of the fundamental people leadership skills that J&J was really just incredibly good at building, in addition to kind of the technology and the process capabilities. Yeah, so
So fast forward to today. I just want people to get the full picture before we dive into the conversation itself. So what do you do today? Tell us a little bit about your activities.
yeah, so what I get to do today is really exciting. So now I
It
get to
is.
sit in an advisory role to a number of Fortune 50 companies that are going through digital transformation efforts, and help them to think about what does the future potentially look like. Help them think about what that potential design should be for them, helping them to really understand their culture, how they can use their culture to help them accelerate the realization of that vision for their organization, as opposed to trying to, I would say, lift the page of best practices out of another company, right? How do you actually use your own company's strengths, and then help them to really dial in and dial up this kind of technical acumen, right? They're really great at what they do. Otherwise, they wouldn't be asking me to come help them in terms of the next great thing. And so that's about, how do they continue to go from great to great to incredible. And so that's great, right? So I get to spend some great time with some really amazing brands.
Yeah.
And then the other side and the other fun of my world is in the venture capital space of seeing these emerging brilliant people that are working in technology, and helping them to really harness how do they think about their technology aspirations in a way that's going to continue to help accelerate supply chain operations and efficiency in the next generation. So
And I
I get
love
to
the
wear
name
both
of
sides
your
of cords.
I'll put a plug here for your practice, but I love the name of your practice. Do you wanna tell what it is?
Yeah, so the name of the firm is So Help Me Understand, and that's what we do. We spend all day long helping people understand various aspects of digital transformation. which is a
So
lot
how
of
do
fun.
people reach out to you? Sasha Koff, help me understand
Yeah,
what.
Skoff at sohelpmeunderstand.com. They can come to the website. They can put in an info link if they want to there.
Cool.
They can reach out on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on that forum as well.
So let's understand more stuff then. Let's dig in. So talk about people because you're the way I look at you is really building that bridge between people and technology for real impact. So, you've said that the future of supply chain is not just technology. I mean, technologies, we love technology, but it's really about people. And you and I've talked about this on multiple stages. Um, and leaders often underestimate the people side when they're scaling AI and decision intelligence. So talk a little bit about the people aspect of it. Why do you think that they underestimate the people side? And what should they do about it?
Yeah, so I think we have to kind of just step back and understand, how supply chain organizational designs have come about and kind of just the traditional trajectory of acumen, right? A lot of how organization success and training has evolved within supply chains today really was a, 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 a reflection of what the technology could or couldn't do. So we
Hmm.
put people in place as bubble gum and duct tape to what the systems couldn't do, or we adjusted our organizational design to actually be able to use the technology the way that the technology was designed, even if it didn't necessarily fit the best way in which we wanted to run our
Yeah.
business. And so for many years, I like to say that the physical world of our supply chains actually outpaced the technology capabilities. We couldn't really see what was going on. We couldn't understand how it was performing. We were constantly trying to catch up to that physical
Yeah.
world. Now we find ourselves in the opposite problem. The technology is actually outpacing in many ways what the physical supply chain can do. We've got these technologies that actually are now so well connected and they can help you make and predict what might happen that the physical world can't actually really keep up.
Yeah.
And so this is where I say you got to go back to the people because the reality is that most people show up every day wanting to do a really great job and they can see whether it's that the technology is lagging and the processes are more efficient in terms of what they can do to make you kind of go better and faster. The reverse is also true. If the technology is outpacing the people, they can give you some ideas in terms of where to go in terms of skills and capabilities that they need to get to build towards that future as well. And this is the actual really exciting part of where I think we are now in this journey, which is that the agentic capability is really allowing us to really understand how to move the physical and the digital world in tandem in a
Hmm.
way that actually can really leverage our human talent in a way that I don't think we've really understood in terms of really delving into experiences, um, organizational kind of connectivity and dialogue between different people. And I think having this opportunity of having a co creator in the agentic space that can help us think more deeply, more fully, think about these cross-functional opportunities in ways that we may not have thought about before. It always comes back to the people, right? You're not going to be able to let the computer outrun the dysfunction of a broken process, and the process has to really be driven by the people based off of an ideal of really what is best in class for that culture, that product, that customer base, that you've got to always start from that point.
But when you talk to a lot of companies, right? You see companies that are ready and that feel ready, and you feel like companies that maybe don't feel ready for that transformation, for connecting their digital world and reasoning down to their operations. Um, when you get in a room and you meet a company for the first time, what are your criteria? I'm sure they're not structured. There's also a bit of gut feel and how you feel in a conversation that allow you to say, well, this company is ready, they have what it takes, and this company maybe needs more work on their people. How do you assess that? How do you think through that?
Yeah, so I would say I would use my own career as almost a blueprint to are they ready? Do they have leaders that are okay trying new things?
Yeah.
That's a first piece, right? Or do they have a leadership that really is just going towards a metric that's on a page? So that's one of the
Hmm.
first litmus tests for me is, are they ready? The second one is, do they really fundamentally have an understanding of the outcome they're trying to accomplish and a key appreciation for the fact that there is a process that needs to be defined to get to that outcome? Do they fundamentally understand what that really looks like? And what I find sometimes is I'll get in a room and the leadership will be looking to the technology to solve that problem. And I've never seen that work. Not once have I seen that
Yeah.
work. In fact, I see that work is a failure all of the time. So that's the second key is, do they really fundamentally understand the outcome and the process? I think the third piece is, look, it is, well, I say the technology is not the hardest problem. The reality is it still needs to be there. Do they have a team in place that really understands their data? They understand the architecture, and they really can collaborate, I'll say, with other technologists in terms of bridging across different technologies. So do they have a teaming outside of their own four walls that is that's present? So those are for me the three real litmus tests.
What
Um,
about one thing I always look for is like, is there a leader who is in the room or just over watching what's happening in the room who's going to say, we're doing this. A line. I mean, I've seen how Dell did it. I'm not here to talk about Dell specifically, but there was in your person and Kevin and a few others, there was authority, and you guys had worked really hard, but there was authority and engagement. There was a level of engagement that made me feel from day one, wow, this is going to be successful because that level of engagement is very solid. In other cases, we see that the level of engagement is not there. It's more like, okay, you guys try this. How do you assess and how do you create that level of engagement at the executive level?
I
Because
love
we're
that
talking
question.
here about transformation of how work gets done. You
Yes.
said very wisely earlier, it's the connection between the digital world and the physical world, which means there is an impact on how things are happening in your supply chain. How do you assess that the strength of that um, support, authority, engagement, curiosity from the leaders?
Yeah, no, and this is a good one. And I probably should have started there, Fred, right? Because I would say before I even get in that room, is there actually truly a sponsor?
Yeah,
And is that sponsor strong enough before you get to those other three criteria, which I've had conversations with leaders and sponsors that actually want to go do that work, and those one of those three questions aren't there, and I've had to go back to the sponsor saying, you know what, you need some remediation, right? Your org is not ready. But
yeah,
let's go back to the sponsor piece. Um, for me, I think it's um, to your point, do they actually have control, both from the standpoint of influence over the org and the org really following them? Do they view them as a true leader? So that's the first piece, not just in title, but in action. Um, this one I love. Do they actually have financial opportunity to be able to say yes and no? Because let's be
yeah.
blunt, it's not just about buying the technology. It is about standing up teams. It's about moving things around. It's about potentially restaging what that financial piece looks like. So you might have a sponsor a name, but they don't necessarily have the financial capability to really push it. I think the third piece for me is, where does that leader fit in comparison to their peers? Are they
Yeah,
respected by their peers, and are they able to actually build a coalition? Because this work is not just in the supply chain, it
that's
touches
it.
all these other functional areas. So even if they have complete control over the supply chain, but they don't really have the cross functional respect and alignment with their peer group, that's going to be a really hard transformation, if impossible, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you mentioned earlier curiosity as part of what drove and enabled the success that you've experienced in your career. It's just incredible. Are these people asking questions? When you're in front of them, are they genuinely interested in understanding what other companies do?
Yeah.
Or are they guarded and not curious? I mean, if you're a leader today at any level in any organizations, if you're not curious, you're out. I mean,
Yeah,
the technology is evolving so fast. The realm of possibility is evolving so fast. The difference between the have and the have not when it comes to curiosity, in my mind, is just mind-boggling. And I, fortunate enough, just like you, to meet with a lot of executives, and I just get a sense of quickly, are they curious? Do they
yeah.
want to know?
Well,
Or are they just not curious and they're looking at technology of, another thing that we have to do? And genuine curiosity, really, you can capture it in and sense it in the questions, right?
yeah,
Am I being interrogated when I'm in front of an executive? Are they asking the question, or are they talking to me? And there's such a massive difference. Someone comes in and say, okay, let me ask you some questions. And that, to me, that limit test of, are they asking me questions? Are they asking you questions? Do they want to know? Are they humble enough to ask questions,
yeah,
or do they think they know and then they just want to try to put you in a box?
yeah.
And this is a little bit more difficult.
Well, one
You
other
and I,
thing. So one
yeah,
other thing
please.
there, Fred. So this is another, and I have a hypothesis going right now, but it's
Ah,
proving to be pretty darn accurate, which is when I ask an executive, share with me what you're reading right now.
oh, that's good.
Are they reading something that's related to supply chain, or are they reading something that's totally different? I'm
Yeah.
finding the leaders that I'm talking to that are reading something that's totally different, not just supply chain, but totally different, are actually the ones whose organizations are actually often than not more ready for the transition than those that are only reading something related to supply chain or business.
So I have to ask you the question: what are you reading right now?
So I'm reading a book from my daughter that my daughter gave me that is a science fiction book.
Cool.
It's totally
That's
off the
awesome.
wall. Yeah.
I read a lot of sci-fi. I love sci-fi. It's
Yeah.
kind of something that I've kind of discovered later in my reading career, but I just enjoy it a lot.
Yeah.
And yeah, so cool.
Yeah.
So talking about sci-fi, and reading, you and I have talked about this quite a bit. You talk about purple people. I think I've first heard that once with our friends at Exxon years ago. They talk about purple people too. And I'm just going to leave the question open. What is a purple person? How and why is it important to be purple? And now people think we're crazy. Not technically purple, not physically purple. It's a metaphor. But what does it mean to be a purple person, and what does that opens when you're when in the context of the transformation that we're talking about?
Yeah. So purple people. So one color, right? We could say it's blue or red. It doesn't matter, but we'll start with blue. Is really kind of I think about it from the standpoint of this business mindset. They really understand supply chain. They have operational fluency. They really understand kind of the business in and outs, and they could talk to your blue in the face in terms of just the typical kind of business components associated with it. The other color, we'll call it red for the moment, they are your deep technical expertise, right? They can read a model, they can push assumptions, they understand the algorithms, they know whether or not it's operational, et cetera. When we talk about the world that we live in now, the real leaders have to understand both of these. It can't be
Yeah.
one or the other. And that doesn't mean they need to be doing all of the work, but they have to have enough acumen to understand both sides of these coins so that they can ask really insightful questions. They can really push their teams from the standpoint of holding them accountable to what's being delivered, not based off of just a kind of something that they read in a headline, but they fundamentally understand what that looks like, and that they're able to kind of go back and forth across this continuum with ease, just like they would within one domain. The challenge that we have is that most of the really solid leaders that we have in the supply chain grew up only in supply chain. And most of the people that grew up in the technology world only grew up in the technology world.
Correct.
Very rarely did you see people go back and forth. And, I go back to my meandering path in my career, and I would take roles that were pure technical or pure business. related. And so it gave me this opportunity to kind of sit on this bubble, across the two. And so when we look for these purple people, we're really trying to find or build these unicorns of people that have the intellectual capacity to be able to do both. They have real world experience in both, and now we're asking them to actually now co-lead these teams together, is really what we're talking about when we talk about purple people. And I fundamentally believe in the age we're in now, right? We're starting to push the computer to help us make these decisions. It's even more important that we understand it. We've got to be able to fundamentally really be able to question what should the boundaries be set within the technology versus within our people? How do we think about the governance around it? Where is the right kind of trailheads around this, and what does the organizational design really need to look like to be able to drive big scale efforts? And if you don't have that fundamental understanding on both sides of the fence, it becomes really hard.
So I'm going to take you to a place where I remember talking about it years ago with you. You were looking at staffing the team, and you were looking at people with very different pedigree and very different background from the traditional profile that you just kind of highlighted. I don't know if you were able to go all the way,
I'm
but
happy to go back to that. You're going to talk about my music theory.
exactly. I want to talk about the music thing. No, because it's super important. Because the one thing I want to say as before we move to that question is, while we might sound a little bit colorful with the purple, the blue, and the red, and we're going to talk about the music, one thing that defines you from my interactions with you when we were working on a project together is what I call GSD. You got shit done. Like you're a machine. Like you're on a call and things align. So, when I first interacted with you, I was like, wow, everybody's scared of Sasha. Sasha, she's driving very forcefully. And at the same time, you're bringing people along. And there's a very thoughtful approach and method, I think, to how you do that. But I want to come back to that a little bit, but talk a bit about the conversation we had years ago, where, I mean, 2 or 3 years ago, not that long ago, about the music thing.
The music thing. All right. So my hypothesis at the time was that music, people that have done really classically trained, deep music education, typically have very strong math skills. So that was the
Hmm.
first thing. And when we were talking about kind of this concept of decision intelligence and modeling, et cetera, you have to understand the mathematic component to it. The other thing about musicians is the fact that they often are playing in a whole cohort of people. It's not by themselves. They're in a group. And so they have to figure out, when do I play loudly? When do I play strongly? When do I actually connect with other people? There's usually a conductor, right, that's helping them and leading them. So my hypothesis was that people that were really well educated in music could make an easy transition into
Yeah.
this domain of decision and kind of approach. So
They make good purple people.
they make great purple people, and that was the hypothesis. So I got the go ahead to test the hypothesis, and we brought in half a dozen interns that were masters and PhDs in music. They actually were teaching, or they were somewhere involved, and they were looking to make a career change. And we brought them onto the team, and we said, okay, we want you to help us lead this analytical stuff. And I remember people looking at me going, she is absolutely off her rocker, off her rocker. Okay, so fast forward, these musicians that we brought in as interns ended up being some of the strongest players we had on the team, because
Yeah.
they were used to having to learn how to work together. Number one, so they weren't afraid to ask questions. They weren't afraid to listen. They weren't afraid to lead. The mathematical skills just kind of gave them this mindset of being able to think differently and question. They understood processes. So it was fascinating to see. So yes, now everybody's going to go trying to hire music people in their world.
I love it.
Right, but I think we have to also uh, challenge the status quo of where talent might be sitting in the world, and how do we think about using those skills in I'll say a tangential way. So yeah, it was a hypothesis that was proven true, and I know that several organizations are now using it.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was. But I love it because there is a progression in this conversation, right? And with purple people is an element of it. I have a last question for you, which came to my mind when I was listening to you. And again, looking back at what you've done, and you led, in my experience, one of the most successful and you know impactful deployment of decision intelligence in the early days. And one of the things that defined your success was the ability to partner, and the ability to partner with us. And I would love for you to talk as we wrap up this conversation, because I look at the time and we can speak for another 2 or 3 hours together. But your ability to extract the best value from your partners, whether it's internal, external, and you did it with us, pushing us. That doesn't mean you were a softie, but doing in a way that, and I'm a big believer in that, where we engage with companies that are looking at you as a partner, and they extract the best out of you and your team, and your team will work day and night just because we want you to be successful. And those who look at you as a vendor, and as a vendor, we're going to push and beat up, and then we do the work. There's no issue there, but you don't get you don't get that extra passion from the teams. How do you drive this partnership? What's the balance between the blue and the red, to stay to our purple's analogy?
Well,
How do you do that? What do you recommend to people who start in that journey and they're engaging with partners, internal consulting, software, it doesn't matter, technology? How do you drive that your partners to deliver the very best for your organization and for your project?
yeah. So there used to be a saying from one of my leaders that I don't care what badge you are, you're only badged to this team.
Hmm.
So it didn't
That's a good
mean if
one.
you were the company or you were the vendor or you're the consultant, it didn't matter. You were the part of that team. But I think it fundamentally starts from know yourself first. So Fred, I don't know if you remember when I reached out to you and I said to you, look, this is what I know we're really, really strong at. Here's a gap.
Hmm.
I think you can bring that gap. And I remember you saying to me, I don't know if you're really strong on that point. And I said, no,
Yeah,
I know.
I remember.
I know we have the data. What I don't have is somebody who can actually have a model that can run my data the way I want to run it right now. But if my hypothesis is right and you can do it, we could really do some incredible things together. And I think that's the fundamental piece, right? When people are starting out and they're looking for a partner, and this is different than a vendor.
Know
Usually
yourself.
you have to know yourself first, right? When you're looking for vendors, typically it's stuff you already can do well and you're looking for capacity. A partner is somebody that actually is bringing a skill or a capability to the table that you don't know how to do. So you have to be able to be in this place of trust and vice versa on the other side. The partner also has to trust that you actually are really strong at what you say you're strong at. And I think that's where the magic happens between, I'll call it a vendor relationship versus a partner relationship. And I have always found that in the kind of work I want to be doing, which is pushing to that next level of excellence, I need partners. I don't need vendors. I need people that are going to add something to the table that we're not capable of doing right now. And so that's the difference.
I think that's awesome. I think there is also back to the know yourself. There is know your stuff,
Yes.
and know your stuff as the project goes along. The difference between this project and others that we've seen is um, you would get into a steerco and you would know your stuff. So you keep everybody internally and externally. You're not waiting for an update. You know your stuff. You're
Yeah.
aware of the people, the technology, the data coming in, the logic. You can go deep. So you know your stuff. So you bring everybody as part of a lot of those tier scores can be just like we've a bit fluffy.
Yeah.
What you've been driving was not fluffy. It's like
Well,
you know
and
that you got to get
you
ready,
got
and
to.
you're orchestrating across your ecosystem.
Well, and I think this is the other piece that unfortunately I have seen all too often, which is the outsource of accountability. And I see the fluffiness when the quote unquote named leader has transitioned that accountability outside of themselves to a group, to another leader, et cetera.
True.
And so I've just never been a fundamental believer of that. If you're leading something, you're ultimately accountable, which means you have to understand it. You have to understand it. That doesn't mean you do all the work, but you have to understand it.
I agree. Sasha, we could talk for another 2 hours. I would love that. But we're running out of time. So I want to thank you for the chat today. We totally went off script, which is the way I think we should do it, all this podcast. Love your insights. Give your address again. So help me understand.
Skoff at sohelpmeunderstand.com is
All
the
right.
email.
I invite everybody to reach out to Sasha. She's a marvel when it comes to connecting technology, people, processes. So, Sasha, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
This concludes our Decision Intelligence podcast, Scaling AI and Decision Intelligence in Supply Chains, Why People Matter. And you can view today's podcast on our website at eratechnology.com. Thank you very much. See you next time.